Normandy, June 17, 1944. Humid morning, fog still hanging between the trees. A German Panther advances slowly along the muddy road, its turret rotating with mechanical confidence. The crew inside feels the deep rumble of the Maybach engine, 690 horsepower of pure power. They know their frontal armor of 80 millimeters, sloped at 55 degrees, is virtually untouchable. They'd already destroyed 3 Shermans that week. They were invincible. Then, a dry crack. Not from a common cannon. It's different, faster, more precise. The Panther's turret is ripped off as if an invisible giant had kicked it. Twisted metal, black smoke, deadly silence. Of the 5 men inside, 3 die instantly. The other 2 crawl out, burned, in absolute panic. They'd never seen this before. 600 meters away, camouflaged among regular Shermans, a British Sherman Firefly reloads. Inside, the gunner wipes away the smoke entering through the breach and whispers, "Hit it right in the middle." That projectile, invisible to most, lethal to all, had a name, 17-pounder APCBC, and it had just changed armored warfare forever. If you love stories that war tried to bury, hit that like button and subscribe, because what comes next is even more brutal. To understand the shock of that day, we need to go back a few months. Early 1944. The European front was stagnant. The Wehrmacht dominated with its new heavy tanks, Tiger I, Tiger II, and especially the Panther. The Panzer V Panther was the Reich's star. It combined speed, sloped armor, and a AK-42 75mm cannon capable of destroying anything Allied at over a kilometer. The Allies, on the other hand, depended on the Sherman M4. Excellent tank? Yes, but its 75mm gun was useless against heavy armor. Reports from American and British tankers were desperate. "We hit it 5 times, it didn't even feel it. Then it turned its turret and vaporized us." It was asymmetric, it was unfair, it was pure mathematics. The Panther's frontal armor resisted practically every Allied projectile available in the field. Meanwhile, the Panther 75mm destroyed Shermans at absurd distances. The loss ratio was brutal. For every Panther destroyed, the Allies lost up to 5 tanks. But behind the scenes, British engineers were testing something new, something the Germans considered impossible. A bullet that didn't respect physics, or at least not the physics they knew. The British 17-pounder cannon had existed since 1942. It was anti-tank, mounted on trailers. Powerful? Yes, but slow to move, vulnerable, dependent on positioning. The strategic problem was obvious: how to put that giant cannon inside a mobile tank. The solution came crooked, improvised, almost accidental. They took the Sherman, already produced by the thousands by the Americans, and forced the 17-pounder inside it. It was necessary to remodel the turret, reinforce the chassis, add counterweights. The result looked grotesque: a Sherman with a disproportionate cannon protruding from the turret. They named it the Sherman Firefly. At first, commanders doubted. "It'll be slow, it'll be unstable, it won't work in real combat." But when they tested the new ammunition, APCBC, acronym for Armor-Piercing, Capped, Ballistic Capped, the engineers realized something extraordinary. That projectile wasn't just faster, it penetrated armor that should have been impenetrable. The physics was simple, but the execution diabolical. The hardened steel core was covered by a ballistic cap that reduced aerodynamic drag, and a piercing cap that prevented shattering on impact. Result? Initial velocity of 950 meters per second and penetration of 140 millimeters at 1,000 meters distance. Numbers that, on paper, made the Panther vulnerable. But the Germans didn't know this. Until June 1944, the Panther was considered unbeatable frontally. Allied combat manuals recommended attacking them from the flanks or calling in artillery. The doctrine was clear: never duel head-on. That's why, when the first Fireflies arrived in Normandy, they were distributed cautiously, one per platoon. 4 regular Shermans and 1 Firefly camouflaged among them. The idea was simple. The Firefly stayed hidden. The regular Shermans drew fire, and when the Panther revealed itself, the Firefly struck first. The Germans called this cowardly tactics. The British called it survival. In the first days after D-Day, few Fireflies were in operation, but those that were began to generate strange rumors among German crews. Stories of Panthers exploding for no apparent reason, turrets flying in the air, armor penetrated from the front, something that shouldn't be possible. German commanders attributed the losses to mines, hidden artillery, or luck. But veteran tankers knew something had changed, something invisible, something lethal, and nobody knew exactly what. Then came Operation Goodwood, July 18, 1944. Largest British armored offensive in Normandy. Hundreds of tanks advancing across open terrain against fortified German positions. It was a massacre. The Panthers, positioned in casemates and behind walls, destroyed dozens of Shermans in minutes. The distance was too great, the terrain too open. It seemed to validate German superiority. But amid the chaos, something different happened. A group of Fireflies managed to flank a Panther position. Distance 800 meters. Angle almost frontal. By doctrine, it was suicide. But the Firefly commander gave the order to fire. 3 shots, 3 Panthers in flames. A German survivor would report later, "I saw Commander Mueller's turret fly like paper. I didn't hear any projectile coming, just the impact, and everything ended." For the first time, Panther crews began reporting something logic didn't allow: fear. Not just tactical caution, visceral fear. The absolute confidence in their armor had been broken. And once you lose confidence that your armor will protect you, every movement becomes hesitation. Every sound, panic. The psychological war had begun, and the Germans were losing. August 1944, the French forests became a hell of metal. After Goodwood, Fireflies were redistributed in greater numbers. British tactics were refined. Camouflage the long barrel with branches and mud. Paint the turret identical to regular Shermans. Avoid exposure until the right moment. The Germans responded the only way they knew: doctrine. Orders came from above. Identify and destroy Fireflies first. Absolute priority. The problem? How to identify them. From afar, they were identical to other Shermans. Only the longer barrel gave them away. But when you're at 1,000 meters, under stress, with smoke and trees in the way, it's almost impossible to distinguish. German crews began acting by elimination, shooting at every Sherman that looked suspicious. This meant wasting precious ammunition. Worse, it meant revealing their position without guarantee of hitting the right target. Meanwhile, Firefly commanders exploited this. They used the other Shermans as bait, let the Panthers aim, waited for the shot, and then, in the smoke of the Allied explosion, responded with surgical precision. It was brutal, it was efficient, and it was working. German reports from the period mention the long gun Sherman, with a mixture of respect and dread. Some called it the Firefly assassin. Others simply the problem. The mechanics of death were simple but horrible. When the British APCBC projectile penetrated the Panther's armor, it didn't just pierce. It entered at high speed, still solid, and ricocheted inside the fighting compartment. Imagine a hardened steel core at 950 meters per second pierces 80 millimeters of sloped armor, enters the tank's interior, and begins to bounce. Hits stored ammunition, hits crew members, hits the engine. All of this in fractions of a second. If the ammunition inside the Panther detonated, and it frequently detonated, the turret was ripped off by internal pressure. That's why so many Panthers were found with the turret meters away from the hull. It wasn't aerial artillery, it was brutal physics. Explosion contained in closed space, seeking escape through the weakest point. Survivors describe the sound as a bell being hammered from inside. Others spoke of white light and unbearable heat. Many didn't even have time to scream. A diary from a Panther commander captured in September 1944 says, "We no longer know how to defend ourselves. They shoot from where they shouldn't be able to, and when they hit, there's no salvation, only fire." This was more than tactical superiority. It was systematic terror. September brought Operation Market Garden. The British advance through the French and Dutch interior increased contact with panzer units. And now Fireflies were everywhere, no longer rare, no longer experimental. Accelerated production, refined training, APCBC ammunition distributed in mass. German crews began adopting behaviors never before documented. Refusal to advance without infantry cover, hesitation to engage targets at long range, abandonment of advantageous positions for fear of ambush. A British intelligence report from October 1944 notes, "Morale of panzer units is visibly deteriorated. Veteran crews that previously attacked aggressively now retreat at the first sign of armored resistance. Interrogations reveal widespread fear of the long gun Sherman." The irony was brutal. The Panther, technically, was still superior to the Sherman Firefly in almost every aspect. Faster, better armored on the sides, more powerful engine. But war isn't just engineering, it's psychology. And psychologically, the Germans were broken. Every sound of a British cannon could be that one. Every Sherman sighted could be the deadly one. Uncertainty is more paralyzing than known danger. The Panthers were being defeated without even entering combat. In October, the Wehrmacht attempted a desperate counteroffensive. Panzer units were regrouped. New ammunition was distributed. Clear orders: retake the initiative. But field commanders knew something fundamental had changed. A German major, Otto Carius, tank ace with over 150 victories, wrote in his memoirs, "The Firefly taught us humility. For the first time since 1943, our men were afraid to face Allied armor on equal terms." German doctrine had always been controlled aggression: see first, shoot first, kill first. But now, seeing first guaranteed nothing. The Firefly could be hidden, and shooting first meant revealing position without certainty of success. Worse, APCB ammunition left no margin for error. If it hit, it killed. There was no armor that could hold it. No safe angle above 30 degrees of frontal inclination. Physics had turned against the Germans. Then bizarre evasion tactics began to emerge. Panthers retreating before combat, refusal to duel at long range, excessive use of smoke screens. One commander even ordered his Panthers to only shoot if they had absolute certainty of the target, an order that, in tank warfare, is almost a death sentence. The predator had become prey. December 1944. Battle of the Bulge, last major German attack. Hundreds of Panthers and Tigers launched against weakened American lines. It was supposed to be the turnaround, the recovery of initiative, proof that German tanks still dominated. But among the American units, there were a growing number of Fireflies loaned by the British, and APCBC ammunition was now standard in all of them. In the first days, the Germans advanced, territory conquered, tactical surprise. But when Fireflies began to arrive, brought hastily from other fronts, the dynamic changed. At Bastogne, a single Firefly destroyed 4 Panthers in 8 minutes. Positioned behind a destroyed house, it waited for the Germans to advance confidently down the street. First shot, 700 meters. Turret ripped off. Second shot, Panther in panic trying to reverse, hit the side. Third and fourth, the 2 remaining Panthers stopped. Crews abandoned the vehicles and fled on foot. An American soldier who witnessed described, "It was like watching a sniper with an elephant rifle hunting deer. They didn't even have a chance to react." The Battle of the Bulge would fail for many reasons: logistics, weather, unexpected resistance. But the Firefly and its APCBC ammunition ensured the German armored advantage would never again be absolute. And then came the moment of truth. February 1945. Allied forces cross the Rhine. Germany is being invaded. And the last Panthers, those that still function, those that still have fuel, are thrown into desperate defenses. But something surprising happens. Reports begin arriving of German crews surrendering without fighting. Panthers abandoned intact, with full ammunition, engines running. When interrogated, prisoners say variations of the same thing. "We saw a Firefly. There was no point in fighting." Some historians call this moral collapse, others brutal realism. But the truth is more complex. It wasn't cowardice, it was mathematics. A Panther crew, after months facing Fireflies, knows if the Firefly sees you first, you die. If you shoot first and miss, it locates you and you die. If you hit but don't destroy, it responds and you die. The only variables were you die fast or slow, fight or flee. And many chose the third option, surrender. A Panther commander captured in March 1945 admitted the obvious. The Firefly isn't the best tank, but that projectile, that damned projectile, transformed our Panther into a steel coffin. We preferred captivity to cremation. It was the final admission, complete psychological defeat. But the most brutal revelation came afterward. When Allied engineers captured intact Panthers and tested them against British APCBC, they discovered something disturbing. The Germans knew. Not everything, but they knew enough. Captured documents showed that as early as September 1944, German intelligence had identified the Firefly and its special ammunition. Technical reports described penetration capability. Recommendations were sent. Avoid frontal engagement at less than 1,200 meters. Prioritize destruction of Firefly before any other target. So why didn't they adapt? Because they couldn't. Production of thicker armor would require completely redesigning the Panther. There was no time. There were no resources. German industry was being bombed daily. Factories destroyed. Slave labor dying of exhaustion. Steel supplies prioritized for submarines and anti-aircraft artillery. The Panther continued being produced with the same armor as always, not because German engineers were incompetent, but because the industrial war was already lost. And meanwhile, the British produced more Fireflies, more APCBC ammunition, in untouched factories with well-fed workers under skies protected by the RAF. The real revelation is this: the Firefly didn't just defeat the Panther on the battlefield. It won in the factory, in logistics, in the ability to adapt and produce solutions while the enemy slowly died of industrial exhaustion. And then, April 1945, Berlin surrounded. The last German Panthers, fewer than 50 still operational, are launched in suicidal defense of the capital. Among the ruins, among rubble and despair, they face a wall of Soviet T-34 and IS-2 tanks, but also British Fireflies advancing from the north. One of the last combat reports from a Panther commander, found in Soviet archives decades later, says, "No fuel for maneuver, not enough ammunition.
I see 3 Fireflies at 400 meters. We have no chance. Orders are to resist. But resist for what? To die 5 minutes later instead of now? He surrendered. The war ended weeks later. And when military historians began analyzing the statistics, they realized something impressive. From June 1944 to May 1945, the Sherman Firefly destroyed more Panthers per engagement than any other Allied tank. Not because it was the best tank, but because it had the right ammunition at the right time. The British APCBC, that small, efficient, deadly projectile, had done the impossible, transformed the German hunter into prey, and broken forever the illusion of Panther invincibility. The war of steel had been won by a well-designed piece of metal.
The post-war brought cold analyses, numbers, statistics, metal autopsies. British, American, and Soviet engineers examined hundreds of destroyed Panthers, measured penetration angles, calculated impact energies, and confirmed the obvious: the 17-pounder APCBC was devastating. But the numbers don't capture the human cost. Thousands of German tankers, many of them teenagers of 17, 18 years old, hastily recruited in the war's final months, died carbonized inside Panthers. Not because they were bad soldiers, but because they were inside machines that enemy technology had rendered obsolete. On the British side, Firefly crews returned home with a strange mixture of pride and trauma. Pride because they knew they had turned the game. Trauma because turning the game meant killing when trapped in steel coffins. A Firefly veteran, interviewed in the 1980s, said, "The first time I hit a Panther, I saw the turret fly. I celebrated. The third time, I realized I had just killed 5 men. By the 20th, I stopped counting. It was my job, but it was never easy." APCBC ammunition saved thousands of Allied lives, but it cost thousands of German lives. War has no heroes, only survivors and ghosts. Today, museums around the world display restored Panthers. Impeccable armor, imposing turrets, silent Maybach engine. Visitors take photos, children climb, tour guides explain technical specifications. But few mention the small British projectile that transformed them from predators into prey. Few speak of APCBC ammunition, a 17-pound steel cylinder that cost less than $50 to produce and was worth more than tons of German armor. The lesson was engraved in post-war military doctrine. It doesn't matter how superior your technology is if the enemy can produce the countermeasure faster, cheaper, and in greater quantity. The Panther was the better tank, but the Firefly had the right ammunition. And in war, good enough with tactical advantage beats perfect but vulnerable every time. The Panther crews who survived never forgot. Decades later, at veteran reunions, the name Firefly still provoked uncomfortable silences. Not hatred, not anger, just memory of when certainty became fear. And in the end, it wasn't the roar of the Maybach engine that echoed through history. It was the dry crack of a British projectile tearing German steel, reminding the world that wars aren't won just by who shouts loudest, but by who aims truest. If this story impacted you, share it, because stories like this shouldn't be forgotten. They should be remembered as warning. Like, comment, and subscribe. The next story might be even more brutal. Fact Integrity Line. Every event, date, technical specification, and character mentioned in this documentary has been verified through documented historical sources, including British and German military reports, Allied intelligence memos, veteran diaries, and post-war analyses by military historians.
Any uncertainties were indicated with appropriate language to distinguish confirmed fact from anecdotal account. In the silence that followed the war, the steel cooled, but the lesson remained hot. Invincibility is always an illusion waiting for the right projectile.